Hello and welcome to the August BigFix Briefing Room. I'm Michelle McGough and I'm here with Mr. Joe Saylor, and we are going to break down the vulnerabilities for the month. So let's take a look at what's on our agenda. Got a Microsoft Patch Tuesday CVE overview like we always do. We'll go through the rest of the Microsoft security, and there's some more Microsoft security. We will touch on CrowdStrike, can't get away from that. And we've got a couple more updates for you. So Joe, why don't you kick it off?
Sure thing. So as we saw in the overview here, Microsoft has had just a Swiss cheese of a security week. We have 9 0 days that were patched this month, and 6 of them are actively exploited, which is just a staggering number. Like, so many things that are actively exploited that you probably need to be paying attention to, as well as a huge pile of crits. So it's really quite a Microsoft month, which is kind of why this has been dominated by these stories this time around.
Do you want to break down? Yeah, look at these 0 days. I think you had several slides about these. So are you going to do them all like 2, 3, 4 at a time?
Absolutely, yeah. We just do not have the time to dedicate a single slide to every one of these things you need to pay attention to, which is
Got it.
new and interesting, not something I've had to do in a while. So starting out here, so these are all actively exploited. They have code out in the wild that is currently doing bad things with these exploits. First on our list is 38178. That's a Microsoft Edge remote code execution vulnerability. It is a phishing vulnerability, so this isn't, something that a user doesn't have to do anything in order for it to be exploited. We have not only does it require a user to click on a link, a malicious link, they have to be in Internet Explorer mode. So, probably a lot of legacy enterprises have some technical debt with their internet applications, and many of them are still using Internet Explorer mode. And this is just a really good reminder that tech debt is hard to get rid of, but sometimes it will protect you from some pretty nasty exploits like this.
Yeah, I want to add a little something to that too. I think a lot of people think that, Internet Explorer is over, it's not out there anymore, we don't have to worry about it. And it's still there for compatibility mode in Edge. You have to patch it, but really, like Joe said, you need to get off of these old applications and updates so you can get out of this compatibility mode. We're seeing way too many vulnerabilities in this space.
Yeah, seems like one comes out every couple of months.
Yep.
So moving on to a pile of 3 that have all just been glommed together into one line here. There are a bunch of local attack vectors. These are like a dime a dozen in Windows, of course, where a system of an attacker with any sort of local access can elevate up to system privileges. In this case, we have vulnerabilities in the WinSock driver, the power dependency coordinator. So that's the control panel window where you can change the power profile on your laptop, that sort of thing. And then even a good old-fashioned kernel race condition where an attacker can elevate to system.
Okay.
And then shuffling back to some phishing-style vulnerabilities. Again, still actively exploited. We have a whole other slide for active exploits. We have a mark of the web bypass in 38213. So to me, this one is probably, even though it's like a 6.5, is one of the most impactful of all of these, because it reduces an attacker's need to phish a user into clicking multiple times down to just a single bad click. So normally you would have, like, say, a UAC prompt or the mark of the web warning when a user clicks something that's maybe questionable, so they have to at least click twice. So the first click, maybe they didn't think about it, but they get a pop-up that warns them that, hey, are you really sure? And this skips that.
Okay, and that's why that one's higher than 38189.
Yeah,
Because it's got
correct.
really extra checkbox, extra.
Yeah, and they're very similar, right? Like it's another phishing attack vector. The project remote code execution exploit requires a user to open a malicious file. But in this case, they have to, open it and disable some security features, and like there's all sorts of other things that have to happen. Like more bad decisions have to be made, not just the initial click.
I read somewhere that everybody is 5 bad decisions away from just total failure. So don't
Yeah,
make
in
this.
this case, in this case, they're one bad decision away from taking down your whole network. So,
Right.
at least we have opportunity here.
All right, what's next? Oh, 9.1. Let's see if we can
Yeah,
top
so
this.
that's the end of the actively exploited vulnerabilities, thankfully. But we do have a huge pile of crits to go through here.
Okay.
This one to me is kind of one of the scariest of the incoming criticals for this month. It is a Hyper-V guest sandbox escape, so a virtualized system that you tend to think of as somewhere safe to run even malicious code because it's sandboxed and away from all of your other systems. Has an exploit that allows it to run stuff on the host hypervisor. So we can escape your sandbox and do other bad things to your environment. This kind of traversal is just super dangerous because we always think of sandboxes as somewhere that you're safe. They're a
Right.
safe, cozy place.
Right. And when I was looking into this, if you're not familiar with this Windows Network virtualization, this is an absolute core component of virtualized servers. You can't do anything with them if you don't have this enabled. So it's not something you can turn off. It's absolutely required. And we have seen how many sandbox escape vulnerabilities this year. I mean, we saw a bunch of them in March. I know we saw one last month. What's going on here?
Yeah, I mean, if we apply a little game theory to that thought, in March, there was just a huge catastrophe with hypervisors. Like every hypervisor had some sort of sandbox escape that month.
Yep.
And I think we're seeing additional sandbox escapes because now attackers are like aware that that's a thing that they can go after. So we saw those 3 or 4 in March, and suddenly people saw that there was like a big fat target there on virtual boxes. And so now all these security researchers for the black hat side of the equation are just hammering on virtual systems to look for these kind of vulnerabilities. So I think
Oh,
that's why we're seeing more.
okay. And there was not, at least at the time of this recording, there was not an exploit in the wild yet.
Correct. Yet. Yeah. And this is one of those that because it's such a big target, yeah, I expect it to be a race. So
Yeah.
this was announced and that the documentation is out there. There are now attackers looking for how to exploit this. I can absolutely guarantee it. So it's a race between you patching and them figuring out how to make it happen.
Okay. Thanks, Joe. What is next? Oh, a 9.8. You beat the 9.1.
Yeah, and yet somehow this one scares me less. It's like not quite as bad.
Yeah.
So it's an exploit in the line printer daemon service, which is basically it's a deprecated service. It's been deprecated since Windows 2012, so a couple of days, been a minute, and yet somehow the service still exists in like even in Windows 2022, you can install and enable this. Um,
Okay. And I
it
don't
isn't
think we're going to see a lot of this, right? I mean, it's for a print server.
yeah
So it's not going to be in your endpoint, on your laptops. It's not going to be in your desktops, most likely. I mean, I guess maybe you could server on a desktop, but you understand this is used less and less. To your point, it's been deprecated, but still out there. Um,
Yeah, it can be out there. I did include a really simple bit of relevance. If you have your BigFix server stood up, you can create a fixlet with this or a property if you'd like, and anything
okay.
it returns relevant to is where this is actually installed at. I think we're going to find that it's installed basically nowhere. There might be a few servers, but for the most part, I feel like printers are generally network devices at this point and have their own print server services installed. And so we don't typically see like a Windows print server just as commonly as we did maybe like 10 years ago.
Okay. Okay.
Oh,
This
and
is
I suppose to describe the effects of this, it's
yeah.
a It's an unauthenticated remote code execution exploit. So that's why it's 9.8. It's super bad, right? Like if you have this, if this service exists, it needs to be patched right this second. Turn this off, go patch it now. But again, it's not going to be
Oh, wow. Yeah,
on your
I
boxes
get it.
everywhere.
There, when we were talking about this before we recorded it too, this is in the roll up, right? So this is going to show up, like everybody's going to technically be running this patch, or am I confusing this with another one?
No, this is totally the thing. Yeah, I
This
mean, this
one.
is part of the problem with having cumulative updates. Every box that's currently relevant to the cumulative update for this month will show that it's vulnerable to this CVE, which looks really, really bad. It looks like your systems are
It's
all
not.
going to be taken over, and it's not as bad as that, right? So if you want to see the granular CVEs in BigFix anyway, just searching for this service, this LPT service, is a much better way to do it, so that you're not quite as panicked about how vulnerable you might be to this one.
Okay. Thanks, Joe. That's really good. All right. Oh, this is the Armcast. Okay. These are I was looking into see what uses RMcast because when I saw multicast, Joe, I was like, oh, imaging servers, right? Um, and it's really used in a lot of areas, live video broadcasts, stock market feeds, collaborative tools. I think that's the one where I'm wondering because I know what you're going to say about this one, so I'm going to prepend that with this might be really broadly utilized. It's in Microsoft. If it's in Office, or I guess if it's in the OS that interacts with Office, this multicast feature is used to do things like work on a document simultaneously and be able to see those changes, or use a shared whiteboard and have everybody be able to see those changes. It isn't a small use case from what I could tell in my research, but Joe, you're going to tell me how your research went because it was probably as hard as mine.
Yeah, it's super difficult to determine where exactly this is relevant. So, I mean, the consequences of this are pretty severe. There's a reason it's a 9.8. Any box that's listening is a multicast listener. So this is server type stuff, not all of your endpoints. Is vulnerable to this and can be just taken over, right? It's an unauthenticated remote code execution exploit. So super bad consequences. As far as detecting exactly where it's relevant, that's way more difficult because it's not a service. Like there isn't a PGM service that you can just go look and see if it's running. It's a per instantiated network listener issue. And it isn't really terribly easy to determine, at least through relevance. Vulnerability scanners should certainly be better at this, um, but it's fairly difficult to tell which of your listening ports is a multicast port. And so, determining exactly which boxes are vulnerable here is a little more difficult, right? Like it's
Yeah.
not as simple as checking a service name.
Okay. But then there's a patch for it.
Yes.
So applying that patch, just apply it. I mean, it's going to be a lot easier to do that than it is to go and search for where the vulnerability exists.
Yeah. And where the vulnerability exists is more for prioritization. Like those, if you know you have a multicast box, like patch it again, turn this off, patch it now. But otherwise, this isn't as it doesn't it's not quite as impactful as it probably looks given its CVSS score. Like you don't need to move up your patching for every box because of this one.
All right. Well, I think our opinions are divided on this one, Joe. So I'm really curious to see what happens with this. I'm actually going to see if I can set up a feed and watch to see if anybody's exploited. I hope you're not.
Yeah,
Um,
fortunately, no known code that exploits this out in the
okay,
wild. But
good.
again, it's a race, like it's been announced, so
Right.
there are attackers looking for it right this second.
Yeah, unauthenticated remote code execution. Is that what you said? Or
Yes.
unauthenticated? Yeah. Oof.
Yep.
Go patch
What the
it.
worst of the worst.
Okay.
Uh,
What are you going to hit us with next? Oh,
Speaking
gosh.
of the worst, this one
Oh,
is just terrifying. Again,
yeah.
fortunately, not exploited right now. The exploit requirements for this include flooding the adapter with IPv6 packets, like malicious ones.
Okay.
So, you'll probably see additional activity on your network, maybe if some attacker is trying to exploit this. But it is an unauthenticated remote code execution against the IPv6 stack in Windows, full stop. So every Windows component that has an IPv6 address is vulnerable to this. So any line of sight that an attacker has on any of your boxes,
Ouch.
they can just execute code on your box.
Why
Even
did
worse.
Sorry. Sorry, even worse.
Even worse is that, so because it's remote code execution, an attacker can now traverse. So say you have a laptop out on a like a public Wi-Fi. It has a public IP address that attackers can see. They can take over that box, and then because they're on your VPN already, they can then traverse through your VPN using the same exploit. So pretty brutal. Like as far as just general network security goes.
I'm holding back tons of inappropriate laughter, not because I think it's funny, but I don't know how else to respond to this. It's
Yeah,
bad.
rough,
Probably
absolutely
the
rough.
worst we've seen this year.
Yeah, if you're lucky enough to still have IPv6 disabled, I know some customers do have that on their network, then congrats, you won the lottery. Like, you were not vulnerable to this and don't have to worry about it. But otherwise, yeah, it's a really big one. Now, this is a CVE that maybe you should push up your patching to get ahead of this one.
Agree. Yeah. All right. Tell me you don't have another one of those.
I kind of do, like a little bit.
9?
We have more than 9s.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is all from the CBL Mariner Azure Linux distro. This is the Linux backend image that Microsoft wants you to use for anything you do in Azure in their cloud. And this is really just a bunch of kind of legacy is the wrong word, but they're really older CVEs that existed in libraries and other Linux applications that just happen to be in the Mariner distro. And they all need updates, right? So there's a Docker vulnerability in authz, like any plugin that uses authz, which is not most of them. Like, it's not a default thing, right? This is a separate plugin you would have to use in a Docker application. There is a complete authentication bypass in that plugin, which is fixed if you update your CBL Mariner image. Same thing with like a local elevation of privileges and Emacs. Like, that one has a huge CV rating, or a huge CVSS score as well. And then one that's even, I really hate this one. In Go, there is a vulnerability where during build time, a malicious package can just do whatever it wants. Like, it can call executables, it can do anything. So if you use the go get command, which is the thing that just goes and grabs plugins or whatever you want to do in Go, it just goes and gets a virus for you. Like, it'll just do whatever it wants.
Okay. Well, common base Linux was not something that was on my radar before we were preparing for this today. It just wasn't something I was paying attention to. So I had to do a little research on it to get familiar with how it's used and how serious do I think this is. And I found some marketing documentation about it. And one of the things it said was that it was purpose built to be secure from the ground up with a reduced attack surface. And I'm not sure I'm feeling that right now, Joe.
It does not seem very reduced today.
No, it doesn't. All right, well, moving on. What could
Guess what?
Oh, yeah.
We're off of Microsoft. It's like a miracle. I think we're like 20 minutes into this, and we finally got through all the big ones. So congratulations, us. Thank you for anyone who's managed to stay here this long. Sorry for how dry this was. All right. Yeah,
what do we
so
see?
moving on to a couple of stories here. We can't get away without talking about the CrowdStrike that shook the world. You probably already know the story. Super quick recap. CrowdStrike pushed out a definitions update to their scanner that blue screened like every Windows box on the planet. And they, very quickly retracted it, did what they could to help, but many of those systems ended up in boot loops. It was a whole thing. Airports didn't work for like a couple of days. Like I was not a fan.
Lots of things didn't work for a couple of days. I mean, there were signs on businesses, and we all know the story. The thing that drove me crazy is people kept calling it the Microsoft outage, or the
Yeah.
CrowdStrike outage, and it's like, well, friends, the only thing that's out is your stuff. you know. But I think everybody should be back up and running by now. But one thing that came up a lot from our customer base is, what could we have done anything differently, in hindsight? And I think you've got some strategies here, Joe.
Yeah, I mean, as a Ring Zero application, like everybody's got an antivirus application that runs right on top of the operating system kernel. Like it's right there, and if anything goes wrong with it, like it'll cause this sort of issue. So it's not just a CrowdStrike thing. My key takeaways from this is really around like the disaster recovery preparedness. We tend to think of DR exercises as, hey, my servers went down, my data center like got set on fire, or like got knocked over by a flood, something like that. Something happened to my servers, and I need to be able to recover my servers. But this has taught us that stuff can happen to your endpoints, and they need to be recoverable as well. So, in this case, like BitLocker recovery was the main thing that really killed a lot of people.
That blew my mind, Joe. How many people had not escrowed those keys?
Yeah,
Blew
brutal.
my mind. I mean, just across the world, I couldn't believe it. I don't. There's nothing else to say there.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you don't know what BitLocker key escrow is, like go look that up right now and implement it. That will save you from like all of this like permanent boot loop, blue screen forever type things. Um, in addition to that, like I didn't see a lot of customers have a plan for endpoint OS recovery, like mass endpoint OS recovery. Some of the smoothest recoveries that I saw were some customers that were using Pixie to boot
Oh, yeah.
into a recovery image. So they had already had Pixie servers set up that were generally kind of accessible on their network, and so any of these systems that were down, they could use Pixie to boot into their hosted image, and it was easily modifiable by them, right? So they would create a script that deleted the death files that CrowdStrike dropped on their systems, and just have their recovery partition, their recovery image, run that script whenever any system booted into it. So all they
Oh,
had to do was tell their help desk to, hey, tell your users to plug in somewhere that they can reach a Pixie server, hit network boot, and it would just fix their problem, right?
that's awesome. Yeah.
So having some sort of, easily modifiable Pixie server that, someone has some expertise with, someone in your organization can do recovery type things with, that's where I saw the most success in recovering from this.
I noticed at the bottom here you're mentioning something about George Kurtz.
Yeah, I don't want to get too much into conspiracy theories here, but
Oh,
just maybe look at where George Kurtz ends up next. So he is the CEO of CrowdStrike. Um, he was also the CTO of McAfee in 2010. For any of you old people, I guess I'm an old person now, which it hurts me to say. Yeah, it's
yeah,
just how
okay.
life is, I guess. Eventually, you become an
Also,
old person. I don't recommend it. Um, so 2010, McAfee had the same exact thing happen. They like blue screened every box on the planet. If you lived through it, you were down for like multiple days because our tooling wasn't quite as good back in the halcyon days of 2010. But same exact thing. So if George Kurtz goes to be a CEO at another uh, antivirus application, like watch out. That's all I'm saying.
you heard it here. All right, moving on. Oh, Dark Angels. This is this is really interesting because I mean these guys are a threat group, right? And I couldn't even figure out who they are. I mean, I found some different things that said, well, we think they're Russian, but we don't really know. And usually with threat groups, it's almost like gangs where they're, tagging all over the place, talking about what they own and how badass they are. And these ones are different. You want to tell us about them?
Yeah, so Dark Angels is like their MO is basically the same, right? They will use some sort of ransomware to lock systems and exfiltrate data and ask for payment to not release that data or to allow your systems to be unlocked. The difference with these people is they don't really like advertise that they're taking over boxes. They aren't trying to disrupt business. That's not their goal. Their goal is to make money. They've been wildly successful at it, and we don't really hear about them. So their stealth approach is really working. They actually were just paid $75 million for a ransom recently, and no one really heard about it, even though that's like a record amount of payout for one of these attacks. So they just don't they don't try to be disruptive, which has served them really well, and it served us very poorly because those like the victims that they've attacked, and this goes for pretty much all ransomware stuff. Like nobody wants to disclose the details of
Right.
any attack that succeeded against them, right? Because it's not good for you. Like as a business, if you disclose that you were like something was exploited and the details of the exploit, like your stock goes down, it's not good for you.
But you're supposed to disclose,
Yeah.
but I think you can get away with it for a fee if you don't.
Yeah, I
That's
mean, there's SEC requirements to disclose any material attacks, right? Like you have to disclose what was stolen and who the stolen data might affect. But that's kind of the end of it, right? They like you don't have to do a whole post-mortem and post, what the threat group did, how they exploited what they exploited, which would be
right. Yeah.
super valuable information for all of us to have, right? So it's a really classic prisoner's dilemma where an individual is encouraged to do something that's good for them but bad for everybody else. And I don't really have much of another angle here because I don't know how to make that like incentivize disclosing exactly how these attacks have taken place and exactly who did them so we can all be safer. So
Yeah. Yeah.
just
The other
food for
thing
thought there.
about this is I predict that we'll see more threat groups or threat individuals like this because this one, Dark Angels, strikes me as someone mature. Doesn't mean older, but certainly wiser, knowing that making a bunch of noise isn't what makes them a bunch of money. And as these threat groups that are out there and the individuals running them begin to mature, they might see the benefits of going down this path. And that's concerning to me too. I mean, this is it's basically an industry. Being a threat group is just like that. That's a line of business now. Sadly,
They
that's
are
the
businesses.
reality. Yeah. Okay. Well, do we have anything positive?
No,
Or is there
never.
more?
We never
No.
have anything positive. Not even a
Oh,
little bit. Uh,
36 this month. Didn't we
yeah,
see
kind of a heavy
sandbagging?
month.
Like we felt like we saw sandbagging a couple months ago when there were like 9 or
We
10.
did, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And now
Whoops.
we have further sandbagged. Um, yeah. So
Oh,
in general, our 36 vulnerabilities in the Linux kernel this month are not particularly terrifying. They're all very standard Linux fare, where it's like local crash vectors. A local attacker could take something down. There's some use after free, which is not great. That allows an attacker to um, just execute arbitrary code on the box. Given they're already local, that's mostly like looks like elevation of privileges. The one that concerns me the most, mainly because I really love NVMe, that's like super fast local disk. It's, back
okay.
when that came out, that was the future is now to me, like just the fastest disk I've ever heard of. Um, there's a vulnerability in NVMe over TCP. So this is a network adapter faced NVMe drive that has a use after free vulnerability in it, which to me is pretty serious, especially in the Linux space.
Okay. Now, use after free. This isn't remote code execution, right? Use after free is local, but except for it's over TCP. So
Yeah, it's typically you would think local because that means the memory, when the memory comes free, an attacker can basically swap in whatever they want into that memory block and the
okay.
application will execute it. So usually you think local, but in this case, because it's on a network interface, it's a lot more like remote code execution to me.
Yeah. Okay. I understand. Yeah, that's why you put it in red. I'm with you now.
Mhm.
And that was the maximum one. Is that the one that's a 7.8?
Yeah. There's a few others that are 7.8. This is why the severity doesn't really line up with real world risk to me a lot.
Okay.
That one is much more severe to me. Anywhere that NVMe over TCP exists is like super vulnerable because it's on
Mhm.
that network interface.
Okay. Okay. Thanks for breaking that down, Joe. Well, was there more? Oh, something good.
We're
Okay.
done with the bad news this month. Yeah, super dry, super negative. Sorry, I feel worse now. I feel like a worse person for having said all that.
Today was tough. Yeah.
Moving on to something slightly better. We have a new release for the ServiceNow data flow this month. It adds support for pagination in the data pool, which should improve performance quite a lot. It adds support for duplicate properties, and
Hmm.
it also adds support for the latest edition of ServiceNow. So all sorts of new good stuff in the data flows. For those of you unaware or have not seen this product before, it's essentially a two-way data flow between ServiceNow and the BigFix database. So you can either, in your CMDB, pull data down to your endpoints and to the BigFix enterprise database, of stuff like location data or who owns what box directly from your CMDB into BigFix, or you can go the other way and throw BigFix data into your CMDB based on matches on those computers.
Yeah, I love this. The best power of data is correlating it and integrating it with other solutions to automate. So I love to see this. I love that it's bidirectional. That's fantastic. But we've had this for a while. This is just an update to that.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Well, what a month, Joe. I think I need to go either have a shot of whiskey or a nap. I'm not sure.
Need to take a shower. I feel gross.
That's
Totally
it.
gross about all of this.
Thank you so much for joining us. If you're still here, we appreciate it. Like and subscribe. We'll put the shorts on LinkedIn. Stay safe, everybody.